Hey, fam. Our guest tonight is Representative Chris Rabb, who is a father, educator, author, and social justice activist. He's a graduate of Yale College and the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the author of Invisible Capital: How Unseen Forces Shape Entrepreneurial Opportunity. He taught at Temple University's Richard J. Fox School of Business and Management, and while at Temple, he helped unionize 1,500 fellow adjunct professors. He has been a fellow at Demos, the Poynter Institute, and German Marshall Fund of the United States. Representative Rabb previously served on the boards of the Bread and Roses Community Fund, Mount Auburn Cemetery, and the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper, which was founded by his great-great-grandfather in 1892. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Representative Rabb, Pennsylvania State Representative Rabb, to the show. How you doing, Representative Rabb?
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Well, we got a lot of ground to cover because so much is happening in the world today. So we're going to get right into it if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in lieu of the recent protesting in America that has highlighted the inequities in this country and the different attitudes to those protests, my question to you is this. What are your feelings about whether or not there will be real and effective change when the dust clears in the nation and for that fact around the world?
Well, that answer is simple. That's up to us. We can't wait for government. We can't wait for corporations. We can't wait for other venerable institutions to do what's right. We have to take over those institutions or burn them down.
Okay, now can you be a little bit more specific when you say take them over or burn them down? Because a lot of people today in today's climate want to put their swing on things. I want it to come out of your mouth.
Sure. So if you don't like the people in elective office, vote them out. If you think that the people in elective office, and I'm starting with elective office because that's why you have me on the show. I'm a state representative. I'm an elected public servant. And, I'm in the Pennsylvania General Assembly that passes state laws. We create, amend, and repeal state laws. So we have a lot of power collectively. I'm one of 253, so I have less power than, the collective body. But nevertheless, I was elected to serve and to legislate. If we're not legislating on matters that we should, then folks like me need to be held accountable. If the folks aren't doing their job, they're corrupt, they're lazy, they're stupid, they are practicing internalized oppression, whatever, then you need to hold them accountable. And that happens not just during election season, but in between election seasons. You can make it very uncomfortable for us to do our jobs or to ensure that we do our actual jobs. It may be a little harder during the pandemic, but that hasn't stopped millions of people from protesting all over the world. And we've seen that has moved, it has moved the dial a bit. Now, is it enough? No, of course not. But look, when we're talking about institutions that are centuries old, like policing, the very notion of policing started in Pennsylvania in 1700. So it is a 320-year-old institution that is not going to crumble in a day. But we do need systemic change. And this is the first time, perhaps ever, I don't even know if in the 60s they were talking about it with the level of depth and sophistication that so many people, and inclusive of young people, are talking about. And seeing within a matter of days or weeks, real change in various ways. You have Minneapolis that dissolved their police force. You have white politicians so afraid of civil unrest that they're tearing down monuments and statues. They're putting up Juneteenth holidays without black folk even asking for it. Now, I don't know about you, but asking for Juneteenth to have a day off was not on my top 25 list. Like, it's nice, but it was not on my list. Like, to me, was ending police violence, right? Fair funding for our schools, any number of things, but removing these things and putting up holidays, that was not on my list. So that tells you how scared these folks are, and they should be afraid, because if they continue to provide excuses for inaction, then bad things will happen. And that's just reality, and that's the history of this country, right? So this is not a threat. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to suggest things that are killing folks and stuff like that, but we have a history in this country of nonviolent and highly violent rebellion. I descend from 16 great-great-grandparents who were born into a society where slavery was the law of the land, depending on what state they lived in, and they all died free. But that abolitionist movement would not have happened if before that there were not Black folk taking up arms and killing their enslavers. I have no shame in saying I descend from ancestors who killed for their own freedoms. You know why? Because everybody has done that from time immemorial, and our country was founded on white folk killing other white folk. And it was okay for them. It's okay for us to kill our oppressors. And that's what led to ultimately to the Civil War and ultimately to the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery as we know it. So this is our time. So we can't outsource responsibility to those politicians or those corporations. We have to take the power. And that also means that embracing who our allies and accomplices are in various places, because we need folks on the inside and we most certainly need folks on the outside. So if the folks on the outside say, look, we're going to work with the folks on the inside who we can trust. And if that's just one person, so be it. It's better than nothing. And you crack that door and then you rush in and you demand the change that we all deserve. And that's what we're seeing. So just know that the type of systemic change we want, if we're really committed to it, we know it's not going to take an election cycle. It's not going to take a season. It's not going to take a year. It may take a generation or more, because I am a descendant of abolitionists who spent their entire adult lives fighting for the abolition of slavery, and they wanted it, immediately, and it didn't happen for decades. Now, I don't think we should wait that long, but they weren't waiting. They were fighting. So we're going to keep doing it until we win. And if we say, well, I'm tired of fighting, I'm only going to do it a year, then you're not really down for the cause.
That's right. It's a life journey.
It's a life journey. I'm a genealogist and family historian, and I've never said I'm only interested in my ancestry if I can get every single piece of information by the end of the year. No, I keep finding information and building that up and drawing strength from my ancestors. And I've been doing it now for over 25 years. And now I'm talking about that with my sons, and letting them carry the torch and find out more information. It's an ongoing thing. It's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a relay race.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right? Because we can't always hold that baton. We got to pass it on.
Pass it down. That's right.
That's right.
Now, you said two things that was very interesting just now. One is the politicians, what I find, they succumb to pressure. That's how they make change. You got to pressure them, because you can talk all day, but if there's no pressure, there's no change. And two, people don't realize, they try to make it look like this big fantasy thing when they teach it, but people don't understand or remember the Boston Tea Party was very violent.
That's right.
Violent activity.
You're destroying private property. You're going on someone else's property, and then you're destroying all these crates of tea. And that they say, well, this is the land of laws, and this is the rule of law, and all these things, except when they're upset. So these right-wing extremists who I work with in Harrisburg, they love the Boston Tea Party.
We're gonna get to that.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mention that all the time. That was a destructive act, right?
Oh yeah, among destructive acts.
Many.
But that's the one everybody knows about.
That's right.
All right. So now, there was a $2.6 billion stimulus package created by the federal government for coronavirus aid.
Right.
Now, how or what did you and your office do to help local businesses get some of that COVID-19 relief grant funds or what can businesses that still need help do moving forward?
Well, they need to call their city council person. So if you're in Philly, you call your city council person, which is interesting because I remind people that they have five, six people they can call. You have your own council person in your councilmanic district, but you got 5 folks who are at large, and they do constituent services for the entire city. So if you feel your own council member is not responsive, you got at least 5 other choices. So use them. Call your state rep, like me, if you're in Northwest Philly. Call your state senator. All of them have resources, and more, it's about information and connections. So if you call, we're going to say, here are the programs that exist. Let's see what you're eligible for, and then help you figure out how to apply for that money. If we find out that you're not eligible for a program, then that's on the federal level, right? This is federal money. I'm on the state level. So we can tell you what your eligibility is. We can tell you where to go, but we can't make someone who's ineligible eligible. That's power that I would love to have that I don't have. But for more information and for connections, because oftentimes people are very frustrated. They don't know who in government, where in government, how in government to do the things they need. But if they build a relationship with someone like me, who takes constituent services very seriously, my team will help them along the way. They won't just say, oh yeah, that's a federal issue, click. They're going to say, you need to talk to so-and-so and let me help you, right? If it's not about us helping you, then we haven't done our job. So I can't, not all politicians, public servants, elected officials are created equal. So you got to find the office where you feel respected and get the information you need and use them, because that's our job.
Right. See, one thing that I've noticed about when I talk to people is some politicians, they don't like to cross paths into other politicians' areas, but the electoral has to understand that if they go to one of these people at large, they'll help, because your cousin Susie might live in that person's district and say,
right,
hey, that guy helped me out, vote for him.
Right.
See,
yeah. So
all helping each other.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. So I'd say a couple of things about that. One is there's a difference between politicians and public servants. Mm-hmm. Both may be elected officials, but a public servant is someone who serves the people first and foremost. A politician is someone who serves themselves first and foremost. So they may help people, but they're going to help themselves first if they're a politician. And the reason I ran was I was tired of politicians, and I thought our district deserved a public servant. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, does your elected official play well with others? If this is something that you try to instill in your children in pre-K or kindergarten, playing well with others, you would want adults who are in positions of power to play well with others. So if I need to go into somebody else's district, I need to do something that involves other folks. I want to know that my staff can talk to their staff, that I can collaborate with other elected officials laterally and up and down, local, state, federal, because when we work together, we get so much more done. And so there's some folks who work well with others and others who don't. And so if you are someone who wants help and you're trying to figure out if the person who's supposed to represent you is so oriented, then there's some questions that you can ask, and there's things that you can see on your own to determine if that person is a team player, if they have a collaborative spirit. And if they are, wonderful. If they're not, then, maybe some change is in order.
Right. So you're a believer in horizontal and vertical integration when it comes to public service.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't imagine doing otherwise. And why would you? If you know that when you come together as a community of public servants, how powerful you are to help people, that's the best part of my job. I mean, I'm a nerd. I love legislation and policy and stuff. But at the end of the day, there's no greater joy than being able to walk down the street and a little old lady come up to you and say, "Oh, baby, your staff is so wonderful. They help me keep my lights on." That is the best feeling in the world,
I can
right?
understand. I can, because
Yeah. So
I'm a retired teacher. So,
you know,
oh
you
my
know,
God, some of my
it's
old
the
students come back to me and say, "Oh, you this?" I said, "That's what it's all about."
that's what
Right
it's
there.
all about,
Yep.
right?
But we're gonna change gears here because I got a lot of ground to cover with you in a short
Okay.
time. But I have some questions that my audience might want to hear from you. So I'm
Okay.
going to start with this. Since you are a double minority in the Pennsylvania state governing body, here's my question. How difficult is it to get legislation that you truly feel will move the entire state and especially the Black community forward, especially when there are and can be agents of chaos within that legislative body?
That is a great question. That is a wonderful question. I appreciate you asking that because when I was elected the same night as what's his name in 2016,
I got you. We got
and and I joined the smallest uh, caucus group of House Democrats in 61 years. So now
wow.
it was a double whammy for us. We got this the Orange Menace at top, and then in the state legislature, so few Democrats that we could barely keep things together. And I thought to myself, what am I doing? What could I possibly achieve when right-wing extremists are controlling this body that I've just joined? And I learned something really powerful. I've learned many things in the 4 short years I've been in office, but one of the things I learned was sometimes there's a convergence of opportunity that transcends partisanship. And even though the people who come together may have radically different ideas about a number of things, if you focus very narrowly on something that is that provokes a visceral reaction across the ideological spectrum, change is possible. Now it's rare, but it's meaningful. I'm going to give you two examples.
Please.
One happened yesterday, and one happened last year. So last year, I decided to reintroduce a bill to repeal the death penalty, which I believe is inherently racist. And it got no movement in my first 2 years, none whatsoever. The second term, which I'm finishing up now, I just had a different feeling. There seemed to be more movement nationally and such, more open-mindedness. And I was walking on the House floor, and I walked by uh, a work buddy of mine who is a right-wing conservative. Let's just say he's an ultra-conservative Republican.
Yeah.
And for some crazy reason, we get along. And I said, "Hey, Frank, where are you on the death penalty?" You know, and he said, "Oh, I'm against it. I'm against it. As a devout Catholic, yeah, I'm pro-life. And if you're gonna be pro-life, you gotta be pro-life all the way through." I'm like, huh. I don't hear a lot of Republicans say that. Um, and he says, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "Well, I'm considering reintroducing the bill to repeal the death penalty." He's like, I strongly support it. Whatever you need from me. If you need to add my name as your co-prime sponsor, I'd be happy to do it." I said, "Frank, are you serious?" He's like, "Absolutely. You would add your name as a co-prime so we introduce this together, Democrat and Republican, progressive and conservative together." He's like, "I feel strongly about the issue, so yes." And he did it. And he is working on getting conservative Republicans on board with this progressive Democrat. And we're going to come here and meet, and we are going to abolish the death penalty in Pennsylvania. And I believe we're going to do it by the end of 2021. That's what I believe. Now, we don't agree on 98% of things, but we agree on that 1%. And then I found out he also believes in compensating, essentially providing reparations for exonerees, people who are wrongfully convicted and incarcerated in our state. So he essentially believes in reparations for incarcerated people.
Wow.
I didn't realize that. He is a conservative Republican from Lebanon County, and he came up to me and said, "I'm interested." So now we have 2% in common. Next year, maybe it's 3% in common. It's real small, but don't tell me it doesn't matter. When you're talking about dissolving death row, a death row that may have people who are, with intellectual disabilities, people who are railroaded, who are actually innocent, um, people who are convicted as children. So you're talking about extraordinary opportunity that's happening because two people just happen to agree on one really important issue in one moment in time. That's real. That's not political grandstanding. That's history making. And so we have to look for those opportunities, because if we only find people who mirror our beliefs, I mean, we can't even find that in our own family. A family member, a sibling, a parent who believes in everything that you believe and has the same priorities, that's not going to happen. So we got to meet people where they are. The reason he's for abolishing the death penalty overlaps with why I do it, but differently. I don't come to it from a pro-life perspective. I come from an anti-racist perspective. I come from it's flawed, it's costly, it's not a deterrent, it's cruel. Like I have 6 or 7 different reasons, and we overlap on 2 or 3 of them. And that's enough. Even if we just overlapped on one, it's enough to work together. So that's the first example. The second example just happened yesterday when my police accountability bill just got voted out of the House of Representatives unanimously.
Wow.
Unanimously. It is a bill that would create a database where it would have all the personnel files of any police officer, including constables, sheriffs, state troopers. They're all the personnel files in this database, so that if they leave under shady circumstances, like before they're fired because they did something awful, they leave and they join another police force on the other side of the state, or maybe in another state. And the people who hire them don't know that they're hiring a bad cop, a rogue cop, a killer cop, because right now a chief of police does not actually want to hire those kinds of cops, because those are the ones that cause the most injury to public trust and cost so much money, because when they brutalize or kill somebody, they have to pay, right? There's a cost associated with those civil lawsuits. And actually, chiefs of police, we may not share all their beliefs as Black folk, as activists, as whomever, but it is not in their best interest. And they do not go out of their way to hire cops who are going to make their job 10 times harder than it already is, and much more costly. So my database bill is going to be enacted into law in a matter of days. And we're going to be the best state in the union to have something like this that most states, and our state has never had before. And that's powerful. And the only way that could have happened was because of mass protests led by Black folk, led by young folk, led by folks who want systemic change, because they inspired a bunch of Black legislators, including me, to take over the House floor and say, we're not going to let you continue with session if you do not have immediate legislative action on bills we've been working on that Republicans have thwarted for years. And they consented, and they said, okay, we don't want this drama. Let's figure out how we can work together. But it's only because of that pressure that this happened. And so that I don't take the credit for that. The thousands of people on the streets, they deserve the credit, because it was their leadership, their vision, their anger, and their mobilization, their organization that allowed folks to be influenced in different sectors of society, inclusive of the legislature. They deserve the credit.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I always say, for 2 P's, politicians, pressure. That's all people got to remember. But now we're going to keep it moving.
All right.
You are the sponsor of House Bill 1666, which creates a database within attorney generals. You just talked about that.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I want to know is, with that in concern, is how are you about immunity for the police? Because that's a topic that the federal government is throwing back and forth in the
right. Sure.
They want to keep it. The Democrats want to get rid of it.
Right. Well, many Democrats want to get rid of it, not all. And that's the same on the state level, right?
Can't say all.
Right. So listen, for all of you who are in Philly or perhaps Pittsburgh, in other kind of urban centers, the Democrats you're used to are not the same as the Democrats who represent other areas. You would not even recognize them as Democrats. But in terms of qualified immunity for police officers, that's an issue that's being dealt with on the federal level, but it's also being dealt with on the state level.
Okay.
And there's something in this state that everyone needs to know. It's called the single subject rule. And it means that you can't have a piece of legislation that addresses two different subjects in one bill. So there are any number of issues that we need to be really concerned about regarding policing and police accountability, but they can't all fit in one bill. So my bill is very focused on reducing the ability of police departments from passing the proverbial trash. So the worst cops being able to just move and avoid, all kinds of issues and scrutiny. But if you're talking about qualified immunity, that needs to happen under a separate bill, and we are working on it. I have colleagues from across the state, all Democrats. We're hoping to get a couple of Republicans on that to work on that bill while the federal government does their own thing in Congress. Same with my bill. They're working on a federal police database so that, we can track these cops and make sure that the bad ones don't infect other police forces. So these are good questions. So we can do things simultaneously, and you can also do stuff on the local level. So the mayor and the city council of a given city has a lot of power. And oftentimes, and up to this point, a lot of them have not done nearly enough because they haven't had what you just talked about, the public pressure. Listen, they're so concerned that they were going to destroy statues, break into municipal buildings, which, by the way, is exactly what scared the heck out of President Nixon when he took office, and shortly thereafter in '68. He was so afraid that Black folk were going to burn down government buildings, were going into white suburbs, businesses, and doing what he imagined would be awful, awful things. Mm-hmm. So he said, bowing to pressure, he said, I'm going to relieve some pressure here. I'm going to open up government and allow Black folk to become civil servants so they can get good government jobs. So any Black person who has a good government job on the federal level, that's because of mass protests and the fear that Black folk would not take it anymore and do things much like what was done at the Boston Tea Party.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I watch, I'm giving you a little kudos here. I watched a real inspiring but poignant speech with the members of the Black Lives Matter group at the attendance at the state legislature. And you talked about various issues in that speech about policing the Black community and what we face on a daily basis just living. But one of the things that I really would like addressed and by you, but I kind of already know where you might be, but I'm going to let you speak it, is what I found is many times with this policing issue, it revolves around marijuana issues. Because with the marijuana issues, that allows a policeman to say, I smelt marijuana, so let me stop that guy. So that's their premise of creating the entire situation because they smelt it when they may not have even had any marijuana. So
Right.
where is it at in Pennsylvania as far as decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana? Because I know I've spoken to other state legislators about this.
I appreciate that question as well. And I'm going to take a step back real quick because as a fellow educator and someone in the legislature, I have an even greater sensitivity to the power of words. So I don't use the term marijuana because the origins of the term are inherently racist.
Right.
White politicians created that term in the 30s to scare white men and women into believing that cannabis was a bad thing. They associated with hypersexuality and violence in Black men and Mexican American men. And it was around public safety, around protecting white women and girls from a drug they believe would make Black and Mexican American men go crazy for their women.
Wacky weed.
That is yes, wacky weed, all that stuff. It is inherently racist terminology. So I try not to use the term. So I use the term cannabis. And when I'm talking about the cannabis that can get you high, we call that hemp, right? And we've been growing hemp for centuries. They say that even the founding documents were written on hemp. So there's a long history of that. So I want to say, as it relates to legalizing cannabis, we've already legalized medical cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between medical cannabis and regular cannabis is virtually nothing, but it is regulated, it is taxed, and it is commercialized in ways that make rich white folk richer, overwhelmingly so. And I have a problem with that. I was not in office when that happened, so I can't be blamed nor take the credit for that legislation. But now we are looking at what's called adult use cannabis, legalizing adult use. And so that means that there will be legislation that will be deliberated on and voted on as early as next year that looks at legalizing cannabis for adults. What age that is, I don't know. I'm a proponent of making it no less than 25 years old for people using it. That's my own belief based on what I've read and what I know. But the reason it's going to be considered as early as 2021 is because we have a serious budget shortfall because of this pandemic. Serious $5.5 billion that we have to account for. And generally speaking, Republicans will want to slash social services. Democrats like to expand social services. So if we say, okay, let's not slash social services, Republicans don't believe in raising taxes. They don't even believe in paying the taxes that are due now. So what is the choice? Well, you can create new revenue streams, recurring revenue, by taxing a broader use of cannabis. And so I think there will be enough Republicans, depending on how many seats Democrats pick up in November, to pass legislation to legalize cannabis across the board. And then billions of dollars can be generated. And that's going to be one way we're going to address that economic shortfall that we're experiencing. So that's going to happen. The question I have is, how would this new law address systemic racism in terms of over-incarceration of Black and brown folks? How will the industry that will be significantly expanded in Pennsylvania include those communities who have been most beaten down by the so-called war on drugs, most notably folks who are part of the criminal justice system, returning citizens and such, who had no business being in there in the first place. So I'm probably going to be very loud and angry when folks start chipping away at the very thing that I think this law should embrace, which is social, racial, economic justice. That's going to be very important to me. But I see that coming up for serious consideration as early as December. Our new term starts December 1st. We're sworn into office the first Monday in January, which is when the session officially starts. And if Democrats are in the majority and we still have this shortfall, and there's about a 99.9% chance that we will, then we are going to have to come up with solutions to address this economic shortfall. And I think cannabis legalization will probably be the number one thing that's put forward. There are going to have to be other things, but that most certainly will be the top of the list. Is my forecast.
Okay, so now that we've gotten the state and national stuff out the way, now I'm going to pivot to the topic that we originally spoke about at Kendra Brooks' election night victory party.
That's right.
You remember that? Remember that?
I do. That was a historic night and a lot going on, and it was a great impromptu conversation. I was glad to have with you.
When I had the con, I said, I gotta have that guy. Gotta have that guy on my show.
And I told you I'd do it. You know,
you did.
Here I am.
And the more I talk to you, the more I'm seeing that we have some commonalities here.
Absolutely.
Now, that original conversation was about reparations.
Yes, sir.
And, more and more now, I think now is the time for the push because everything is on the
That's right.
table. So let's keep it focused and keep it going.
That's
So,
right. And real quick, before you get to it, I just want to say all these people, all these corporations, all these governments who are talking about Juneteenth and freedom and stuff, you can't be for Juneteenth and against reparations. I defy you. I don't want to hear anybody talking about Juneteenth and not talk about reparations because if you do, I'm not going to trust you. I'll just be honest. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, but I'm not going to trust you.
That's an acknowledgement right there.
That's right. It
You know?
is.
And once you acknowledge something, you got to make it right.
That's right.
You got to make it right.
You
But
can't just say, whoops, my bad. You got to do the work.
that's what they've been doing. Whoops, my bad. Now
Right.
it's time to do something else. But the audience, my audience has this question that I have to ask.
Okay.
Now, you wrote a bill for reparations in the state of Pennsylvania. How did you come about with the way you crafted that bill for state reparations? And there's going to be some
Sure.
follow-up questions to your answer.
Absolutely. Okay. So on the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Black folk into Jamestown in 1619, I released a press release, and I was on social media saying that I would be introducing a bill in the foreseeable future. And so that was August of 2019. And since then, I've been working on it because this is a very complex bill and it may end up having to be multiple bills. So I have not actually introduced or drafted the bill. I have created the conceptual framework and doing the research towards drafting it and introducing it by the end of November. So those are two important points. So when someone introduces a bill, it is assigned a bill number. And until then, it's pretty much just an idea. Now, it could be a well-documented idea, but it's not a bill until you have a bill number. Otherwise, it's just what's called like a memo, a legislative memo that lets people know what to expect in the bill, but the details have not been worked out. So I don't have details about my forthcoming bill. I do have a conceptual framework that I think is worthy of discussion because oftentimes when someone says they're going to do this, that, and the other, people start assigning motives. And oftentimes those motives are negative. And so I've gotten critiques about a bill that does not exist. And people are telling me, with authority, why my bill is wrong. And I have to remind them that, one, I don't have a bill yet. And two, because I don't have a bill yet, they don't have anything to read that confirms or rejects their assumptions about a bill that has not yet been drafted.
Actually, that helps you.
Yes. What's that?
Actually, that helps you craft that bill.
Right, because I get feedback. Now, some stuff I'm going to agree with, some stuff I don't, but I learn a lot from folks who don't agree with me. So one of the biggest critiques I've gotten from Black folk actually is, where's my check? I want cash. And my response to that is, how much do you want? And if I've been in Pennsylvania 18 years, how long you been in Pennsylvania?
Oh,
like you? How long? Yeah.
Well, I'm not from Pennsylvania,
Okay.
so I wouldn't get reparations from Pennsylvania.
All right. So let's say you were, and your family had been here for 4 generations. Okay. If the basis of my bill is that being Black in Pennsylvania has hampered your ability to achieve at the same level as white people, that there are structural things put in place by the state legislature to marginalize you because of the body you inhabit as a Black person, then it would make sense that if your family had been in Pennsylvania for 4 generations, and I've been in Pennsylvania as a Black person for 4 months, the amount of money you get should be more. That's just reasonable.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, how do we figure out that algorithm to say, well, how much should Chris Rabb get? And how much should Lloyd get? We got to figure that out. So the people who say, look, I just want my check. I don't want no government programs. I don't want no transferable tax credits. I don't want any of that funny business. Just give me my money. How much? And who determines who gets more. What if you've been in Pennsylvania, but you can't identify, you cannot document that you descend from a Black American who was enslaved in Pennsylvania or anyone else, versus somebody who can but hasn't been in Pennsylvania long. Like I can document a ton of ancestors who were enslaved because I'm a genealogist. I've been doing this over 25 years. I can't identify a single ancestor who was enslaved and or lived in Pennsylvania during slavery. I can't do that. Well, then, well, what's the calculation there? Or what about a Black person who doesn't identify as Black? Should they get reparations, right? Because there's some Black folk out there who like, oh no, I'm Cablinasian, I'm this, but they don't want to claim that they're Black. Well, if this is for the descendants of enslaved Black folk, but you're not trying to identify as Black, why am I giving you a check? Then there are people who do self-identify as Black, who are proud Black folk, who are philosophically opposed to reparations. Like I know people like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we giving money to people who don't want the money? I don't think that's a good use of money. So then we have a lot of questions here. What about white people who have African ancestry? Because now we have all these genetic tests. We're finding these white folk, no matter how white they look, may have 0.1% West African, blood, Well, how are we defining Black? Do they get a check? I don't think they should get a check, right? So who's working all that out? Well, that's a lot of work. We got to figure out what that looks like, because my bill is going towards addressing how Pennsylvania, its government, its legislature, its court system negatively impacted the lives of Black folk for generations. So my bill will be a bill to provide reparations for systemic racism as facilitated by the state legislature. It's not it's not reparations for slavery, because slavery is just on one piece of white supremacy and systemic oppression, right? You had Jim Crow, you had the Black codes, you had all these things, mass incarceration, inequitable school funding, racism, any number of things beyond slavery that have fomented the type of systemic racism that we are still struggling against, inclusive of police violence. So the other critique I have is from white folk, most of whom descend from Europeans who came over long after the Civil War, right? So they're like, look, my ancestors didn't, own people. So why should I believe in reparations for Black folk? Well, the reparations for white people, particularly those who come from European nations that Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, where they weren't actually considered white until the early or mid 1900s, their reparations for how they were mistreated because they were Irish or Italian or Hungarian is they became white. There's no greater asset for a person in this country and in many others than the luxury of being considered part of the white community. So that's their reparations. Now it's time for Black folk to get ours, because Jewish survivors of the Holocaust got reparations. Our Japanese American brothers and sisters got reparations for the concentration camps that their own U.S. government put them in. Rosewood Massacre in Florida, Black folk got that. Young women, most of whom were Black in North Carolina, with intellectual disabilities who were forcibly sterilized by their own government, they got reparations. So reparations isn't new. It's not just for Black folk. It's not just about slavery, and it's not just about cash payments. So I'm not opposed to cash payments, but we have to figure out, one is, how do we determine how much people get, and how are we paying for it? I literally just finished saying that we have a nearly $6 billion shortfall. If we have the same pot of money that we've always had as a state, and we're going to reallocate that money to cut checks to Black folk, what programs are we taking away from, right? We can't just print new money.
That's it. You've touched on a lot of stuff. I mean, you touched on a lot of stuff with this reparations. Now, I'm gonna address and ask you how you feel about it, maybe starting back and moving forward.
Gotcha.
Okay, now, you said something about the marijuana thing. The cannabis activity in the state. That could be one of the ways that reparations can be paid. With the
Absolutely.
with the tax, because in Pennsylvania it's going to be taxed at the state level, and then they can maybe put a county level tax.
Local. Yeah, it could county, local.
So
I'm
all of
with
that
you.
tax money can be part of that reparation. But
I love that.
the only thing is, people got to understand reparations is a dollar amount, but it's a black agenda that helps bridge that wealth gap.
That's
So,
right.
not to mention the wealth gap, because of all these years of having this oppression, we need mental help. So, we need psychological services that we should have for
Thank you.
free. Then we got
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness.
then
This
we
is
got
this is music to my ears.
then we got to
This
open
is
up the housing. You
so
know,
all of these things that you're saying, all these things you're saying is not just about being compensated individually as a black person who has suffered from systemic systemic racism in Pennsylvania. It is about our community, our black communities that have suffered collectively,
correct.
institutionally, transgenerationally. And so you can't give somebody a check and address the racial wealth gap. Can't do it,
No,
right?
no,
Unequal education. It has to be packaged. It's so I'm a both and type of person. I tend to be both and versus either or. So people say, we need checks, we need this, we need everything
that's right.
when we deserve everything. So what does that look like? And so what you said, I love two things that you said. One is all this cannabis revenue, tax revenue, that needs to be going to us. That needs to be going to the communities that have been brutalized for generations the most. Black folk at the top of that pyramid. No, absolutely. And that's going to be a fight, which is why public pressure and civic literacy about what's happening behind closed doors is so important for us as black folk and for folks who believe in justice, because what's going to happen is there's going to be agreement to legalize cannabis, but they're going to want to take the money and put it in their projects for all kinds of random stuff that has nothing to do with the injury that has befallen black folk and other communities for generations. And we have to demand that however much money is used, it's used in the right and just way. So that's number one. And I so appreciate you bringing that up, because that is a real opportunity for us. The other thing is, nothing will change if we do not address the wealth gap. For every dollar a white household has, a black family has a dime. At most, at most,
Thank you. At most.
right? At most, which means that it's 10 times harder to buy buy our first home, send our kids to college, start a business, invest in real estate property, whatever, right? All of these things are radically harder. So we have to have solutions that address these systemic issues. And if you're talking about wealth creation, that's one of the hardest things to do in a short period of time, because white folks have accumulated great wealth over generations. Some in the elite, right? So some in the elite, they've benefited in a matter of quarters, in a matter of years, like Jeff Bezos. He's going to be our first trillionaire, right? He's not the average white person. The average white person, is not doing great, but they're doing a heck of a lot better than black folk. So it happens over generations. So what are the programs we're putting in place to make sure that we're achieving parity over time, and that we have all the opportunities, and frankly, more opportunities than white people? Because for generations, white people, and white men in particular, and white men who own property and who were literate, had vastly more opportunities through the government. And one of the reasons I say that, well, I say this for a number of reasons, but I was literally just doing genealogy over the past few weeks, and I found land grants given by the U.S. government to white people, whether they fought in the American Revolution, and they were given 100 acres, just free and clear. Now, they had to kill any indigenous people who might have been hostile to their arrival and stealing of their land, but if they could survive and they could grow food and do whatever they did, then that was their land forever. Well, we didn't get those same opportunities. We didn't. So if you have a great, 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 great grandfather who had 100 acres of land, and it became prime property over time. You give more land, you give these to, each generation when you buy land and such. We weren't even able to buy land until, Reconstruction. So, and then it was stolen from us when the KKK started, and then that land was stolen from
Or
us. And
taken.
just taken, just get out, right? And so we own less land now than we did 100 years ago because of domestic terrorism through KKK and the complicity of state governments and the federal government. So if they got 100 acres of land in, the early 1800s, what do we get? Whatever that is, it needs to be a heck of a lot more than any other group to start levelizing, because it's not just about equalizing. Equality is not going to be fair for us because we're starting down here.
Yeah,
So we got to get more.
We're there at the 50-yard line.
Right. We got to get more. So we're not demanding equality. We're demanding justice, and justice in this environment means that we need an equitable solution, which means that we're going to get more than what any other American gets, because Black folk are uniquely victimized by systemic oppression.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're getting close to the end here. So I
All
have a
right.
couple of other things that I want to get in before we go. Now, I saw that you're going to be on a panel at the Cobra convention coming up.
Yes, sir.
Now, Cobra has the view more so of a Pan-Africanist, where all Black people should be compensated and taken care of some sort. Now, in America, we have a group called ADOS, who believes that the American descendants of slavery, should have a specific carved out lineage package because of what has been done to slavery in the past. Where are
Right.
you as far as that? Are you a member of either group, and where are you with the thinking of both?
Yeah, I'm not much of a joiner, so I'm not part of either group. Um, but I'm a floater. I like to work with folks. I'm a bridge builder. So as someone whose ancestors, whose family has been in this country for generations, for centuries, I identify as African American. That means something to me. That lineage, that connection, and there is a specific and intense history for those of us who self-identify as African American, Black American, what have you. This
ADOS
is the only
actually.
right. So I strongly identify with that. But because my bill is about systemic racism and not solely slavery, this issue is a little different, right? And my legislation is different because systemic oppression does not care what part of the diaspora you come from to be mistreated. Now, if your people have come over from, let's say, Nigeria, and they were PhDs, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they had cultural issues, and they look Black, right? Then they're going to treat you as Black. Now, you may have more educational opportunities because you came here with a PhD, right? So that's very different than you having a GED and grown up in the projects. Very different. So there's different sites of privilege that different folks may have. But at the end of the day, white supremacist law and policy and culture has brutalized all Black folk, irrespective of their mother tongue or where they came from. The vast majority in a lot of these places, particularly in Pennsylvania, is such that it's pretty much African Americans. But again, I refer back to the algorithm that we're going to have to work on, which is how long have you been in Pennsylvania, right? Because
Sandy Darity.
oh yes,
He has a lot of the answers to what you're asking.
Well, he has a different approach. He doesn't believe states should be involved. I strongly disagree, and
Right.
I find it baffling that someone so intelligent and so committed to this would disregard states when slavery was a state law.
Mm.
Right? Listen, if you don't acknowledge that slavery was a state law, you don't understand that it was a state law, then you need to take a step back, because it was. Depending on what state you were born in as a Black person during the antebellum era, determined if you were property or a second-class citizen.
Right.
So what that means is we have to have state level solutions as well as federal solutions. So I don't oppose his work on the federal level. We need that work, but we also have to do it on the state and local level, and we also have to do things separately that address universities' complicity in slavery and systemic racism, corporations,
Bank.
religious orders, banks, all of them, because they are all complicit. And my bill will address indirectly all of those things as it relates to what happened in Pennsylvania to allow those different institutions to thrive because state laws made it possible for that to happen.
Okay, so in essence, what he's saying and what the group ADOS is saying is that state laws, a state reparations package may give, or the federal government may try to use that as an opportunity to not have reparations, saying, oh, each state has to take care of that.
Listen, here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with that argument. Congress has never needed an excuse to ignore the need for reparations. So saying the states are going in the right direction is not actually a good argument. In fact, it will put more pressure because people are saying, well, if Pennsylvania is moving toward this and Connecticut and New York and South Carolina, then why isn't the federal government doing it? Because they were complicit as well, right? So that's not a really good argument. And frankly, look, people need to stay in their lane. If they don't understand state politics, if they don't understand policy on these levels, and they understand it on some other academic level, then they just need to concede that that's not their space. But to speculate without having done the real work and talked to folks who have influence on state level policy, I think is irresponsible. So I respectfully disagree with that vantage point of Professor Darity. I think he's absolutely wrong.
Okay, you know what? I would love, and I'm going to ask you that, if I can get him to agree to come on the show, can I get you so we can have that debate?
Absolutely, I would love it.
Okay, and that's what I'm going to do. That because, both sides here have a point, but knowing how this government, this federal government works, they will use any opportunity that I truly believe to just say, well, they're taking care of it, even though we sanctioned it, the states have taken care of it. So,
well, that's a disingenuous argument for anyone to make, for anyone in government to make, because and we do that. We talk about minimum wage, right? That, a city or a state will say, we're going to pass minimum wage, right? But that only covers that area. The federal government has a federal minimum wage. No one's saying, oh, if you increase it in New York, then the federal government's not going to do anything. That's absurd. People are going to say, oh, New York has taken the lead. The federal government needs to follow suit. The same thing applies with reparations. That's not a reasonable argument, particularly since there's no appetite up until very recently for any meaningful discussion about reparations.
correct.
So if you see a major population, a major city, a major state doing real work that talks about government's complicity in systemic racism and reparations, and as it deals with slavery, and beyond, that is only going to put more pressure. But the most important thing goes back to what we talked about originally at the beginning of this, which is if we abdicate our role and our responsibility to protest, to organize, to vote, to do all of those other things, then we don't have anyone to blame but ourselves. And it's our job to make sure that Congress acts appropriately. And listen, they do listen with the pressure that you referred to before. And that's what's going to make the difference, not whether Pennsylvania does or doesn't do something. It's what the people demand. So if you're not prepared to do the work, then, I don't know what to tell you.
I understand. And you know what? I can't speak for that man, but I can ask the questions.
Absolutely.
And we have to wrap this up. It's been a wonderful chat. I'd like to get and talk to you some more. I'd like to help you on some of your issues in Pennsylvania. I'd like you to come on the show and talk about whenever you have something that you want to get out to the people. I want to be your mouthpiece on the radio and on TV and things like that. So, but
that's much appreciated, brother.
I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know you have some issues that you're dealing with. You have my heartfelt
Thank you. I
care
appreciate
your
that.
business and regards to
Thank
your
you.
family. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All
My
right.
pleasure. Okay, folks, we're wrapping it up here, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Thank you, and we'll see you on the other side. Peace.